Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Robert Kubushenga, a coffee and banana farmer and former media executive in Kampala, Uganda. Enjoy this truly inspirational conversation. Robert Kubushenga, the owner of Rujeyo Farm, producers of bananas and coffee, and a former media executive. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, Robert.
It gives me so much pleasure to hear you pronounce Rujeyo, because it took me many years to practice how to pronounce Nube. So
but you do it so well.
Revenge.
You do it so well, my brother. You do it so well. You do it so well.
Yes.
Robert, the transition for you, I mean,
yes.
Which is why I come to you. I've been watching you walking around the banana farm, the coffee farm, and I'm so envious of you. And I must ask you this. That's a huge transition from a jacket and the tie to sweaty overalls and gumboots. How has that transition been, Robert?
It's been very liberating, because there is a sense in which the corporate life imposes itself on you and certain standards. It took me 6 years once I realized that I wasn't going to be a full-time executive throughout my life. So I decided to do something completely radically different, which is farming. Now, to do so would have involved climbing down. Now, there would have been two approaches. I could have found money, a lot of money, which I didn't have, and set up a farm and got in a manager and get people to do that for me, or to be personally involved in it. And that was part of the motivation. So for 6 years, every single Saturday, I removed the suit and put on my overall and spent the day at the farm. Even if there was nothing I was doing in particular, just walking around, being in an overall has a psychological effect on you. You start to accept that you're not the executive that sits down and is looking at Excel spreadsheets and looking at projections and talking all this nice language and then coming to a media conference and meeting big guys like you're dealing with farm hands, people who have no training, but their experience in farming is so vast, they have such knowledge, and you have to bring yourself down and be dependent on their leadership and on their teaching. So it was such a liberating thing for me to it was a journey into humility, a journey in patience. So by the time I was ready to leave my office, I had practiced for 6 years on how to climb down. So it wasn't as traumatic or as PTSD as it might appear. No, I had practiced this for a while, and I was now ready and prepared to climb down from the corporate high horse and come into the farming world.
And why farming, Robert? That's very interesting. Why in particular farming, Robert?
Two reasons. The first one, I would say, is political Pan-Africanist, if you may put it that way. That our generation of Africans, especially Black Africans, we have an obligation to those who come after us for us to get involved in actual productive work ourselves, not delegating, not paying other people to do it for us, but we ourselves, modeling the kind of economic activity that we would like the younger generations. Because participating in this kind of productive economic work is really ultimately what is going to liberate the African. So it's at that level. So there was that element. So I know my position in society, especially in Uganda, and it was important that someone like me models that kind of activity. And so that we can bring up farming as we know it, away from the subsistence hard scrabble life that we saw our parents and grandparents, one where we can persuade the young people that it is productive. for them to get involved in it. The second one is personal. Apart from my skills and the job I was doing, I really had no business investments to talk about. I have some assets, real estate, but so I was dangerously reliant on my labor. And I began to worry that if anything happened to me and my labor was no longer economically productive, I would be finished. So I needed to set up an activity which on its own produces something of value that somebody is willing to buy. And farming was really great because it produces food. And someone told me that no person in the world has ever won an argument with their stomach. And so you have a permanent market and demand for farming products.
Right.
So it made sense. And so I decided that farming was the thing to do. There are other benefits. I mean, lessons of life, patience, getting to spend life in nature and yet still make money from it. Not have to be in town and screaming at the next guy who's driving like mad next to you. So it's even much more peaceful and more rewarding to try and start something like that. I mean, you walk through a banana plantation and there's nothing. There's no noise. It's just the rustling of the banana leaves, or in the coffee, the smell of the coffee. There is a certain renewal about it after you've spent 30 years or 15 years, as I was at the helm of an organization. You need to move away from that and do something radically different for you to renew.
And why coffee and why bananas, Robert?
So let me answer it this way. So, and I'll explain why. So coffee is my fixed deposit and bananas is my ATM machine. Yeah. So, but I'll explain why.
Sure.
So in Uganda, the staple crops in Uganda for economic activity is coffee. We are the largest exporter of coffee in Africa. We're the second largest producers after Ethiopia. So it is an activity. There are 8 million Ugandans who are dependent for their livelihood on coffee. So it's a big economic thing. So it just made sense to invest in coffee as a high value item in terms of crops. So that, that is what, if I produce it well, that's what we're known for. A market exists, I will sell it. So that was one. For the bananas, we produce, Trevor, and this is an important statistic. We produce 3 million tons of bananas every year in Uganda and consume all of them.
Wow.
Yes. there's a staple. The staple food in a large part of Uganda is bananas, and the local word for it is matoke. So, but we also have the largest variety of bananas. So we have everything from plantain, from sweet bananas to that. So I'm mainly specialized in the banana we cook for meals. It's steamed. Basically, we steam the bananas and then we mash them into like your sadza. So it becomes like that. And then we eat it with groundnut stew.
Is this the same as plantain? No.
So plantain, plantain is deep fried or steamed and eaten as such. This one is totally different.
Okay.
So that means that there's a huge demand for bananas. Now, the way it is structured from an economic point of view, or from a business model point of view, coffee will give you money. You'll get a revenue from coffee twice a year because we have 2 seasons. So you grow it, but you only you grow it all year round. It's perennial, but you only get to sell twice a year. So for about 5 or 6 months, you have no income. And then you go and sell and then you get an income. But the farming activity continues. So the advice is that you grow bananas with coffee. Why? Because bananas will give you money twice a month. You sell bananas, you go to the market twice a month because that's the maturity cycle. And
twice a month?
The model is such that
not a year,
twice a month. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, as opposed to twice a year of coffee. Now, the value of that is that the way the market is structured for bananas in Uganda is that it is a purely cash advance payment model. Somebody comes, they harvest a certain quantity of bananas, they pay you cash, they go away. So that leaves you with sufficient cash to run the farm. Coffee, you sell on credit because you have to make sure it's delivered and then they check the quality. Then after that, pay you later. A bit like in Zim, the way you used to trade in tobacco. Same story. So that's the model. So it's advisable that if you have a farm, you have an economic activity that gives you regular income for your cash flow management. Yeah. So, and that's, but the third reason really is a sentimental one. Both my grandparents on both maternal and paternal side were to a very large extent farmers, and they both grew coffee and bananas, although they were from completely opposite sides of the country. So I feel like I am maintaining a family tradition that had been broken by my parents, but now we're going back to the roots.
That's interesting. Tell me, in terms of the coffee, what kind of coffees do you grow? What varieties are you growing there, Robert?
Yeah, so coffee largely in the world has two varieties. It's Arabica and Robusta. I grow Robusta because the region in Uganda where my land is known for Robusta. It is actually the equatorial belt. So I'm in the Lake Victoria Basin, but that belt running from Congo right across to the border with Kenya used to grow. That's the origin of Robusta coffee in the world, actually. That's where Robusta coffee was first discovered. Right. So when the colonial administration came and started pushing for coffee cultivation, they found already existing varieties of Robusta, and they encouraged people in the region where I am to grow Robusta coffee. So I grow Robusta coffee. What's the value of Robusta coffee? The value of Robusta coffee, particularly the Ugandan one, is one, because it is robust in taste and has volume. It is used to mix with the Arabicas from other places to give it taste, to give it volume. So it never stands on its own. And that's why it's very difficult to find Ugandan coffees available around the world standing on their own, because they're primarily mixers, and most of them is what makes the high value instant coffees. But and this is a big one for me personally, Ugandan Robustas have been established to be the best for espressos and cappuccinos. And in fact, the Italians absolutely love Ugandan Robusta coffees, and they buy them in large volume. Arabica is grown in the mountain areas of Uganda. So we are surrounded by mountain ranges in the west of Uganda and in the east. So even there, we do have some productions of Arabica coffee. So that's the bit that we're known for.
Tell me, I mean, are you doing any? I've seen you walking around with packs of your Rugeyo coffee. Robusta coffee. Yes. Are you now in the downstream? Are you doing any downstream processing? How are you doing that?
Yes. Now that's also, I'm glad you asked that, because that's also another lesson that we want to put out to our generation of Africans. We can't keep growing commodities all the time. We must capture a bit more value. So my grandparents, both of whom had modest education, grew coffee and sold sun-dried beans. Trevor, I have a degree. I have been a corporate executive. I have computers. I have mobile phones. How can I be selling sun-dried coffee beans just like them 50 years ago? It's unforgivable. What my going to school and my corporate experiences should count for something. So I've decided that I will do a bit of processing, as much as possible, capture the value. And just let me give you an illustration.
Yeah.
Sun-dried coffee goes for the equivalent of 2,400 shillings in Uganda, which is under $1. It's much closer to 50 cents, 50 US cents. That's 1 kilo. 1 kilo of roasted beans sold retail is the equivalent of 25,000 shillings. That's $4.
Wow.
One cup of coffee, which has maybe 5 or 6 grams of coffee grain or ground coffee, is $2. So why should I go to the market to sell for 50 US cents after all the work that I do? I know how machines are bought. I know how machines are installed. I know how machines are processed. We know about logistics. We know about administration. We know about finance. Why should we even know about marketing? Why should we be selling commodities, produce? We shouldn't. By now, in Zim, you should be selling cigarettes, not tobacco. I mean, I'm just using a crop that I know, but you probably are doing other crops. It's capturing that value. It's being daring enough to break through. Because there's tools, there's equipment. It's being daring enough to break through into those, and that's why I've been experimenting with processing my own coffee, roasted beans, ground coffee, taking advantage of technology to create awareness about it. It is still in its infancy, and I draw a lot of lessons from our anti-colonial struggle, because our anti-colonial leaders engaged in guerrilla struggle against the colonial establishment, even when they had 3 rifles with 1 bullet each. But they ended up succeeding. So long term, I think if some of us start to put out products like that, we grow the coffee, we process it, we package it, and we put it out into consumption. One day, Trevor, one day we will prevail. One day we will be on the market shelves. It may not be now. Even if it's not us, even if it's our children, we will have done them the biggest service by breaking these barriers. And it's time to do it now. We can't leave it to them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And you've said it with your usual passion and robustness. The point is made. So, Robert, farming is backbreaking. It's not an easy thing.
Yes.
And it requires lots of funding that you've just been illustrating right now. How were you able to cope on those 2 fronts, Robert?
Sometimes, by the way, we're also, you didn't say this, but I'll tell it to you. We're also the only community in the world, as in we the Black Africans, that still carry out ritual circumcision as a way of proving that we are men. So if you can go through that kind of pain without anesthesia just to prove that you're a man, surely how more painful can taking on farming be? It can't be that painful. I think that a number of things have changed. One, there's been a lot of investment, certainly in this part of the world, in infrastructure. There's been a lot of investment in knowledge. And one of the things that has happened is technology has really, really liberated information. So you can now find information. These are things that were not there in the 80s. There were things that were not there in the 90s. Even the early 2000s, it wasn't like this. So if there's ever been a time when information was available, and there is money, but I will say this to you, my experience is such that, yes, it's expensive, but I can show you, Trevor, I can show you many ways Africans, particularly Black Africans like me and you, waste money and think that we have no money, yet we're busy wasting it. Do you want to know how?
How? Please, yes.
I bet you, Trevor, that in your compound, there's probably at least $200,000 worth of vehicles.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
You're probably sitting inside $1 million worth of concrete. You call it a house. Yes.
Yes.
You're probably walking around in both your pockets with $1,000 worth of mobile phones. So do you need that level of value in terms of the things you do? So if we just redirected the resources we had to some of these things, so I could have bought a Mercedes at the end of my retirement, a nice cross-country G65, and drive around claiming I'm a wealthy man. Or I could have taken the risk and invested it in my farm. Both of them are risky ventures because the Mercedes, you could crash it, and that's the end of the story. Yes, my crops could dry and I lose, fine. But in terms of endeavors, I have no regret because I tried to do something. So there is money. We have a lot of money. We're just not using it for the right things. If you actually think about the amount of money that people get either through corruption, by having access to public funds, if they converted that money into productive activities and put it in farms and made it more productive money, it would work. So, but what I did was just sacrifice certain things. So I haven't one of the things I cut back on once I started farming, Trevor, was I cut back on travel. Because I realized every time I traveled out of the country, at the end of the year, I would always work out and I would have spent at least $6,000 of my own money on things that I didn't need to do, simply because I had to travel. And every time I traveled, I had to do shopping and buy my children clothes they wouldn't wear because they spent most of their lives in boarding school where they didn't need these clothes. So when you start to think about these things, you know that the way you're spending money could be used better. And once you change your priorities, then there's nothing. I mean, the most expensive things Africans buy is cars and mobile phones. Yet if they converted, and then but they don't tell you that there is no money. They don't complain that, oh, cars are very expensive. No. But when you ask them to put money in things like agriculture, they start to tell you how expensive that is. But they're ready to blow $10,000 to go on a holiday in Dubai, in the Maldives. What are you looking for there?
So you've essentially reallocated your resources, your priorities, you've sacrificed. I saw something that said you've actually stopped playing golf. What else have you stopped doing so that you put money in the farm?
So I stopped going out. Not a particularly good thing for my marriage, but I was able to I was able to explain to Madame, I haven't bought her a new car in over 10 years. She knows that. The good thing is she's looked after her old car very well. Then, of course, I didn't have to buy a car. And when I had to buy one recently, I had to buy a second-hand one. Thankfully, I'm not like you. Unlike you, I am not a sharp dresser. So things like clothes don't matter to me. So that you give up on the finer things of life, but you sort of also withdraw. So you start to ask, like I said, the only travel that I did, by the way, I ended up looking, and in the last 6 years, I've only traveled twice, actually. Each year I traveled once. In fact, there's a year I never traveled at all. So in terms of the priorities that you set to save money, that's one of them. So I think that looking for money is not a problem.
And what's been the biggest challenge as far as you're concerned in going into banana and coffee farming? What has been the biggest challenge that you've had to face?
The lack of actual active engagement by the government. You get a lot of lip service. You get a lot of lip service about support for farmers, but really when you're going through it, you don't feel it. You don't see people. You don't get agronomists to support you. There's some costs I could have done without. I mean, I'm having to find costs for my own water, for instance. So those are the things, the infrastructural aspects from the big things to your farm that are very costly, that you have to undertake. So in terms of the absence of government support, that's where you really feel one of the biggest challenges. The other one that will shock you, by the way, is labor. Labor. Even in a continent that has incredible numbers of youth, that has a high unemployment level, you have people that are simply not interested in working on farms anymore.
Wow.
So labor is a real challenge to get it. Even when you get it, to get them to produce at the level at which you want them to produce is a problem. So sometimes you pay the workers and then they vanish because it's the end of the month and you won't see them for a week.
Wow.
So labor is a big problem. These are the things, money and land, those are not big problems. Those are the real problems are, the labor, the people coming in to support you, that doesn't exist. I mean, you come from Southern Africa, so people in Southern Africa, you will know how much the establishment in South Africa supported the white settler farmers. I mean, they literally subsidized them right through because they wanted them to be established.
Well, even here, Robert, in Zimbabwe,
as a commercial farmer,
even here in Zimbabwe, Robert, we had what was called agri-tax. agricultural extension services. The Rhodesian government did quite a lot to ensure that the white commercial farmers were supported through infrastructure, marketing services, extension services, technical services. So it's something that I think our African governments clearly need to step up on. It's no longer available in Zimbabwe to the extent that it was available during the secular government of Ian Smith. So your problems seem to be similar to what Zimbabweans are experiencing, Robert.
I think that is the greatest letdown of all the post-independence and post-liberation political leaders, especially on farming, that they learned all the things from the colonial administrators, the trappings of power, the ceremonies, everything. But on the substantive things, they failed. I mean, like that, they should know that the economies of their countries, the lifeline is that. And then now put money there. Yes, money in education. Yes, money in health. Yes, money should also go into subsidizing these people, because you want to, I mean, look at the Europeans up to today, up to now, they are still putting money so that their farming sectors don't collapse from lack of competitiveness. Yet we have absolutely zero support from our guys. What you get is a lot of lip service, how agriculture is the backbone of the economies and so on. But okay, if it's the backbone, how are you treating the backbone? You're just opening it up to all manner of rape and abuse. Yes.
You talk about having spent money on water. I was reading something that you are doing drip irrigation and you've got solar power. That seems to be smart way of doing things. Robert, talk to me about that.
So first of all, with farming, as I discovered, 72% of farming is water. If you don't have water, you're pissing in the wind, you're wasting time. Now, how do I get water? So first of all, you get the water source, because those are things that the public administration people are supposed to be doing. They didn't do them. So I had to find my own water. But then I also had to be smart about it. If I had gone, because I don't have electricity on my farm, if I had gone for a generator, I would have opened up opportunity for people to siphon fuel and sell it to the local motorcycle operators. So that wasn't going to work. Secondly, I would be dependent on a farm worker actually turning on the electricity and pumping the water. In the absence of that, so sometimes he may put on, sometimes he may not, and he'll lie to you. So the best thing is to go solar. Why? Because here in Uganda, at least, the sun will be out for a minimum of 3 to 4 hours a day. And when it's out, the water is pumped, it goes straight to a dam and is held there.
Wow.
What that means, Trevor, what that means is that I am not dependent on the rain and the changing patterns. And both my crops are such water-dependent crops that if I keep providing them with water, I will be in business. I am not in this for subsistence. I am in this for business. My level of productivity must be somewhere. For it to be somewhere, I must deliver the water. Those are the investments to make. So it is solar powered, and we use drip irrigation in order to preserve the amount of water that we make available. Yes.
That's amazing. You talk, I know, very passionately, Robert. You say that there is a movement underway by Africans from being consumers to producers. Are you really seeing that? Do you see that movement? Talk to me about that.
Yes. And I am sure, because I can see the rumblings and beginnings of it. Why? Because when I look at my father's generation, all of them spent their early lives running away from a life on the land and in farming. And for them, success was being either a public servant or a corporate executive, living in a nice suburb and driving a car, and your kids going to a nice school. And as long as your salary was coming in, you didn't care. I'm beginning to see a lot of middle class Africans returning to farming and bringing knowledge and experiences that is superior to that their parents had, and applying it on the land and running these as businesses. As I said, it's early times, but the beginnings are there and you can see them. And they're beginning to form an online community. If you actually pay attention, I don't know if Zim is like us, but there are lots of WhatsApp groups around different farming communities, sharing information, sharing knowledge, paying visits, doing study tours. The most interesting thing for me, though, is that it is now cool for young Africans to go on social media and show off their farming exploits. Before, they would have liked to show off their clothes. They would have liked to show off their consumption habits. Now, for you to be taken seriously on social media anymore, you must have some credentials. You must be seen to be around a cow or a plant or some kind of vegetable.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, Robert. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of that in Zimbabwe. I think they've got a hashtag called agricultural revolution or something of that sort. And these are young people, 20s, 30s, and 40s. What do you think explains that, Robert? Why is land and farming sexy again?
There is a much higher level of self-confidence in that generation. They don't have to prove a point. They don't have to show that they've arrived, in the sense that my generation, your generation, our parents needed to prove by having cars, by having all the shiny toys. The younger generation that's doing that are more confident, and they now want to be in the real productive economy to show that they have real wealth, as opposed to this emptiness that we've been living all over these last couple of years. But there is also a sense of courage for you to be able to show that I am brave enough to step out there and take on farming, while you guys city slickers are busy out there and finding life easy and winning tenders and cheating local governments of any services. For me, I am living an honorable life. I am a brave guy. I am out here and I am doing this, and it makes sense. So there's a lot of that that's happening within that generation of young people, and so it's making them feel important. Also, it's driven by the fact that they don't have the kind of employment options we had. They can't just walk out now and get jobs like we did. They must find some kind of economic activity that sustains them. And they look everywhere. They find the sector is saturated. The service sector is saturated. And now, so they go where there is new opportunity, where they can break ground. So if a guy can deliver a bakkie of vegetables every morning to a couple of hotels, and he's paid for it in dollars, why waste time walking from office to office pushing paper in an unfulfilling job? And by the way, many of them can do both.
Yeah. And interestingly, my sense is that that's good for Africa, Robert, because we're going to produce our own food. And like you're saying, there are smart farmers, even smarter than you in terms of technology and so forth. We're going to feed ourselves. We're going to be able to export and that kind of stuff. Am I right there?
Yes, but more importantly, this generation will enter the wealth creation process. We were spectators. We watched and we waited to be gifted with the outcome. We were never participants. These kids, if I may call them that, they want to participate, they want to own, they want to be in the process of generating wealth. So somebody understands that if they're going to be in the dairy industry, they might as well own the animals and be part of the process that makes the butter and the milk. So that kind of ownership is what I see. So I see it in vegetables, I see it in animals, I see this a willingness to be part of the wealth generation or the wealth creation process, because it gives a certain dignity to these people. We are not at the mercy of do-gooder missionaries coming in from the US to save us from our worst aspects. We are now owners and participants in our own future, which includes food security, which includes generating incomes, which includes developing our countries, because that's the only way anybody's going to take us seriously. If you're not producing your own food, if you're not producing your own things to sell, no one is going to show you any. And if COVID taught us anything, it is that. It is that if we are not involved in our own economic activity and generating our own wealth, we might as well sign off to be permanent slaves and forget this whole anti-colonial business.
We're going to talk about what COVID has taught us. and I know you're passionate about that. The plans for Rugeo Farm. I hear talk about a coffee house and ambition around crazy stuff like agritourism. Talk to me about that.
Actually, I have something much crazier, and I'm going to say it now because, one of the biggest industries on the African continent is the hairdressing industry. Yes. So our sisters, they spend a lot of money on hair. Now, I am talking to some guys locally here. It is possible that we can make out of banana fiber hair for braids and those things. So I'm really seriously looking, I am looking at banana fiber made hair extensions. I crack that, Trevor. Me and you will be reading about me in Forbes.
Well, I'm make sure that I'm not losing touch with you, my brother. I'm keeping with you.
Hey, you better not, man. So in terms of crazy things that I'm thinking about, I want to be able to do more with my banana than just the fruit. So banana fiber is a big one. And getting those fibers, they are very good for making carpets, durable carpets. But the more exciting one, as I said, is the guy is really looking at hair extensions. And with time, that could work. Then we don't have to worry about the population in Asia reducing. So we have no hair for hair wigs and extension. We'll have our bananas. So that's one. The other one is I am building what I call an ecosystem. So all the waste that I generate out of farming, I want to turn into energy, both cooking energy and lighting energy. Cooking at biogas level, but also cooking in terms of briquettes, which are more long lasting. So that's one of the sort of radical plans. So it is so radical that I've decided that all my toilets on the farm will be eco toilets. So if my farm workers come, I feed them on my food, they leave me with their waste. So what I gave them as food is going to become energy and fertilizer for me. They don't take it home.
Wow.
See, I reached that startling discovery because some of them were already making use of the bushes around. So now I've decided they will have those eco toilets, and that should help me. Then we will recycle as much as we have recycled. Now, also the way I've set up the farm, it's got really essentially 4 activities: coffee, bananas. I also have cows and bees. And the reason I have all those things is they are part of an ecosystem. The bees will help with the pollination of the coffee. The cows produce cow dung, which we then use for fertilizer or for manure in the banana plantation. But with that, it means that I can also do some beef products. I can also do honey products. So we will have a range of products, and but the key issue is to build a household coffee name. And eventually, when all those are established and have facilities, I can then have a bit of agritourism. So all these people who want to go to Dubai for holidays, fine, let them go and see those shiny buildings. But there are people like you, Trevor, who want to be in nature and to be in green. And you just want to be in silence and not to be disturbed. So you come to my place, I hide you in a nice corner. You wake up in the morning, you take a walk in the coffee. After that, you go back and read your book. Have nice coffee and read a book quietly in silence. Nobody disturbs you. So farming tourism, something to the level of what happens in the Western Cape and what happens, or at least what I used to see in Zim many years ago, that works. So we do have plans. Yes, we do have big plans.
And exports within the region and international community?
One of the interesting things, Trevor, and I'm glad you raised it, is that I was wondering whether this African continental free trade area would be of any use.
Yes. And what conclusion have you reached?
I think there is a powerful opportunity. And I'll tell you where it's coming from. So if I have 5 cafes in Harare and the lodges in my favorite place in the world, Wangi. It's one of It was my favorite place. Hwange is absolutely
Wange,
something else.
yeah.
That's the Garden of Eden is there. So in Hwange, if I'm able to convince those guys to buy coffee from me, and I can deliver, then get a couple of outlets in maybe Johannesburg or the Cape, and maybe in Lagos. And what those guys want from me is for me to deliver roasted beans for them in packs, and I put them on flights to go. The cumulative effect of that could end up with me selling anywhere to 20 tons of beans across the continent. And they will be cheap. Why? Because with the AFCTA, if you're the importer in Zim, you don't have to pay tax. What does that mean? It means that now as Africans, we can trade with each other. I send you my roasted beans of coffee, you pay me, I buy things from elsewhere. I'm really looking at that, because if that then happens, I don't need to go to Europe. I really don't need to sell my coffee in Europe. This whole commodities story is oversold, and it's sold by people with a vested interest in keeping commodities at very low prices. So if I get 3-4 cafes in Lagos and Abuja, all of them giving me a contract and say, supply me with a ton every month. I get another in Cairo, I get in Harare, I get in Kenya, and all I need is to get my kilograms on cargo flights to go out. I will be making a killing, Trevor. And that's how we should think. That's how we should think. So then I will roast, I'll pack it, and I'll send it to you. And you'll be guaranteed. Then I'll have it in my store. Every time you want, I send it to you. So under AFCTA, if I don't have to fill too many forms, I'll be trading with you. I'll be sending you Ugandan coffee, which you then serve your customers. I don't have to send it to Switzerland for it to be processed into Nescafe and sold back to you for you to think it's good coffee. I can actually send you much better coffee than those guys. So that's a radical thinking. And I hope that the young people who are watching me and have ambition, let them dream. These things are possible. It's now possible. The Chinese have made one huge contribution. I don't know if they realized it. They've made tools and equipment affordable. We can do these things. We can do them. We can have processors. We can get machines onto our farms now. We don't need to go miles away to get machines and be charged exorbitant rates. Plus, energy is going to become cheap anyway. There will be energy alternatives. So it's doable, and we must believe it can be done.
Wow, I love that self-belief and self-love, and the Pan-African theme that runs through what you're saying. You have already indicated that your grandfather farmed, and then your parents broke that tradition, and you're back now. Talk to me now briefly, Robert, about where you were born, how you were raised, and eventually going to one of the universities that I love, Makerere University.
So, like most people of our parents' generation, there was a lot of ethnic bias and prejudice. So people tended to marry from within their communities. So my mother was from the eastern part of the country, much closer to the border with Kenya. And my father was from the western part of the country, much closer to the border with DRC and Rwanda. So they met in the center in Kampala. My father was a university student and my mother was a high school student. So they fell in love, and I was the end product of that relationship. In the immediate short term, it didn't work out between them. They only reunite 18 years later and live together till they both died. But so it meant that I then grew up in the capital city in Kampala without so much of the prejudice and attachment. I am very attached to my home and I love it like everyone else, out of identity, but not through prejudice or against either other people or for me. So in that sense, so I grew up in town. Like you could say, it's like you growing up in either Harare or Bulawayo. Yeah, and then deciding to go back deep into the village and start farming again. So I was never originally from a farming background, but I knew that at home, because I used to go visit my grandparents, they were both farmers, and you could see they had farming on a fairly sizable scale because they had large pieces of land that were farmed, but they were mainly subsistence farmers And so I stayed with my mother in Kampala and went to school in Kampala. And then I was lucky enough to join in high school a boarding school that was run by some Catholic priests from the UK. And eventually I found my way to Makerere University, where I studied law. But I have always, I think, had problems with suits and ties. So I didn't practice law because the dress code was stifling. And then I had these strange friends in the media industry that were absolutely mad, you know, the Charleses, the Wafulas, and they all persuaded me that life is better in the media. And I only left 2 months ago. This was 30 years ago. So it was a fantastic ride.
You spent a big part of your life with the Vision Group. As managing director, chief executive, legal secretary, and that kind of stuff. You saw, you presided over the transition of the business from print to broadcasting, radio, and television. Speak to us as briefly as you may, the highlights of that journey, because that's a big part of who you are.
I think the groundbreaking aspect of that innovation was to start local language television. No one had done it. Nobody had ever thought that, like for you now, okay, Zim is a very literate society, you know, 87%. But in our communities, nobody had ever thought about broadcasting in the local language. So imagine a TV in either Shona or Debele, full, no English, nothing, just that. The audience size that we generated as a result of doing that. So opening up local language television. Initially, when I did it, a lot of the people in the industry dismissed me and said, this guy has finally lost his marbles. 2 years later, I was the one laughing all the way to the bank and laughing at them while I was going to the bank because it was a huge success and they were trying to emulate it. So that was one of the groundbreaking things that we did. The other one was in opening up the digital media entry. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't even know where it was going, but we knew that we had to go in there somehow. Go and figure it out. What is it? So to be able to start the business on that journey has forced a lot of people to move in that direction. So the dynamism that exists on social media platforms, but at the same time, the innovations that have come up. I mean, by the time I left, they're already doing augmented reality. So by the time 5G technology arrives in Uganda, a lot of the Ugandan media outfits, particularly the Vision where I worked, will be very, very far ahead in terms of media innovations. And then, you know, now we are able to, you're now able to conduct an interview like this, like we are sitting next to each other.
You are in Kampala, I'm in Harare. I mean, isn't that amazing?
It is. I mean, so it used to be those days that the BBC were the only ones who would conduct interviews over radio. But now it's a given. And it has liberated many young people to innovate in media. And I think for me, that was also the other benefit, that in doing what we did, we created spaces for young people to come up and explode on the scene, especially the whole content area. I mean, it was very gratifying when I left to see that I didn't recognize most of the people from when I first came in, because we now had young people, they're driving the machine, they're engaged, they're dynamic. I think that for me is a major personal fulfillment.
How big was this establishment, by the way, at the Vision Group, just before you left?
Oh, okay, let's put it this way. When I arrived, there were slightly over 300 people. When I left, there were more than double that.
Wow, that's huge. The other thing you did, Robert, is local language newspapers. That was part of the innovation, isn't it?
No, the local language papers existed before me.
Before you, okay.
Yes, but what I did was to team them up with broadcast. So I then created a radio for each of those papers, and the growth in audiences was phenomenal. Because now you had people people had the options, and it grew the audiences. So the newspapers built the radios in the beginning, and then the radios then built the newspapers. So it became a media ecosystem. And in fact, we then set in motion television as well. So in one region, there was television already when I left, two regions. Now they're working on a third. So that has created that level of dynamism that each community now feels that they own the platforms. Where newspapers were elitist, radio brought in the mass audiences, and television has united everyone.
What are your reflections on the state of the media, the African media, Robert, in the first instance? Your reflections on the state of the African media. And secondly, how we as a continent are projected by the world and what our responsibilities as far as that is concerned.
Looking back, we made one mistake. Me and you always felt that we needed the validation of the so-called international media houses. Now I believe we don't. And here's why. Do you know the fastest growing radio audience for the BBC in the world?
It's the African languages.
Pidgin and Hausa. So if they hadn't done that, they were going to go into oblivion. So it's because, Trevor, of what we've done in the last 20 or so years with African media in different places. We've built our own ability to tell our stories. We've built the ability to take out our own voices. And that's why politicians, especially the African ones, are very uncomfortable with us, because they know that now we have the self-confidence and we know how to tell these stories. So that's why they keep trying to dismiss us. And when they fail, they become violent. But that tells you how much ground we've covered, the platforms we've created, the ability to articulate ourselves, the confidence to run these as businesses, and also to capture our identity. So now people are more reliant on our platforms than they used to be in the 70s and 80s. In the 70s and 80s, the biggest radio show in Africa was Focus on Africa on BBC, and Network Africa in the morning on BBC, and a bit of VOA, and annoyingly, Radio South Africa. But yeah, that was during apartheid.
Sure.
Yeah, but now people think, okay, I mean, during COVID, that was the most interesting time. When all these Western media houses were going on about how Africa will be devastated by COVID and what, the blowback from Africans on their platforms has forced, I have seen cases where we've forced the New York Times, all these so-called big media houses to apologize. The Kenyans forced CNN to apologize to them. Some useless woman was there saying how, I don't know, giraffes in Kenya, or I don't know, whales, I don't know where, all this nonsense has now been debunked because we've strengthened our media platforms. We've given our people the voice to be able to put up against all this rubbish that has been peddled and the prejudice against us. So I think that looking back, we've done a good job. And we can now go and farm, knowing the industry is in good hands.
And talk to me about the brutal lessons that COVID has taught us. Manufacturing is one of them. Having a vibrant health sector is one of them. Producing our own things. Am I right there? What other things has COVID taught us as a continent and as a people?
One of the most interesting statements I heard from COVID was that COVID will take out those with underlying conditions. And they were talking about health. So if you have high blood pressure or diabetes, what it didn't say is that there were countries and communities with underlying conditions that would be taken out by COVID. Underlying conditions of corruption, of poor governance. Those countries have suffered because they just couldn't provide healthcare. They couldn't respond to a crisis of this magnitude. So if there is a lesson that we need to learn, is that we need to have functional countries. Somehow we've been spared the worst. So you can imagine if we had had illness at the level and the magnitude of the Western countries and Asia and India today, there would have been a revolution in the African countries. Governments would have been overthrown for that failure. So it is a wake-up call. Can we have or contribute to the building of functional countries? We must have effective states. Part of that is, do you have a functional economy, or are you dependent on things which are elsewhere? You can see people who are terribly, I mean, if you go, I'm sure, to Victoria Falls, you can see the problems of being dependent on foreign tourists. Hotels in Kenya have closed. In Uganda, the tourism sector has collapsed pretty much. So we now need to re-examine how can we build an internal economic dynamic that sustains us? And what are the various things, including logistics, governance, whatever it is, that make that possible? Maybe we even need to change the public discourse. We've been too obsessed with change of power and this and the individuals in offices. Maybe we now need to seriously examine our processes. What is it about our processes that make life impossible? Let's first even spend, if we could spend a year away from the individual players and not debate them, and just look, what is it that is dysfunctional that we need to fix? And how can we fix it together instead of trying to fix individuals? Because we've allowed individuals to have a larger than life role in public discourse and moving the things forward. I think we need to talk about some of these things. For instance, I'm more concerned about how do I get my goods, my coffee, to the coast at no, at the lowest level cost. If somebody can fix my railway line, I'm happy to do that. How do we deal with the marginalized communities, for instance, in northern Mozambique that have now created havoc? How do we deal with situations in countries like Cameroon, like Chad, like Central African Republic? There are vast parts of Congo with resources that have absolutely no form of government of any kind. Then the most heartbreaking, of course, is when you see the kinds of debates that are taking place over public finances and public administration in countries like South Africa and Nigeria. Where did we go wrong? So we need to move away from debating these individuals to actually looking at the structural problems we face and what it would take to fix those. We should learn the lesson that individuals can't fix them. And that's what COVID should have taught us, that we need to look at our structural issues, our underlying conditions, which if COVID hits us, that will
we're
take us
laughing,
out.
but that's a serious one, eh? The underlying conditions that our societies have had, which are exposing the deficiencies that we have as a society. And you raised an important point, two important points: functional society, functional economies that are able to produce vaccines, rather, that are able to produce vaccines so that we're not dependent on America and Europe as far as vaccines are concerned. What's your view on that?
That's precisely the point, that we can't even produce painkillers with our own chemicals. We can't convert our traditional medical processes into modern science. Because there's we laughed at the Madagascans, but they may have had a point. What were the chemical compositions of whatever it is that they were producing that was helping them to cope with this in the first place? So I think that therein lies our lack of self-confidence, that because we've really raped our own systems, we've undermined them because we want control, we want to exercise control, we've hobbled a lot of systems and processes. And now when you need them, they are not able to deliver for you because you allowed your health systems, for instance, to be dependent on Bill and Melinda Gates for their money. You don't want to invest in your own medical systems. What do you expect? So I really think that in there, we should examine, why are we failing? Why do we have to go and buy vaccines from other people? This is 60 years after the first country became independent in Africa. We have to go and buy vaccines from China. These are countries that we were at the same level with in the 50s. Why isn't somebody waking up and saying, to hell with these guys, I'm going to steal? And by the way, what's very painful is that a lot of African scientists and medical people are contributing to the knowledge that is leading, to these things. Why are our people not being harnessed by the African establishment? Why? Why are they contributing to knowledge elsewhere, which knowledge is then converted into medicine? And here nobody really cares.
Because our political structure does not allow them to make their continent a home. They're not free. They don't have the facilities that they enjoy in Europe and America. We've made our home hostile for those that will be able to help us to get out of where we are right now.
Then COVID should make those in positions of responsibility to reflect on this issue. What would happen to your ability to rule a country if you had death on the magnitude and on the scale that we've seen in other parts of the world? Your authority would break down under its own weight.
Yeah.
And then what will you do? You will flee from the situation. And for the first time, by the way, and that's the thing about the equalizing factor about COVID, is that for the first time, the African political establishment cannot fly out of Africa to go for specialized medical treatment. Now they have to stay with us. And then you get situations like our brothers in Tanzania. So
there is a lesson there is a lesson of those underlying conditions. We are in this together. We're in this boat together. Let's fix this, isn't it, Robert?
Yes. Yes. And if anything we should be doing now with all these barriers broken down in terms of technology and ability for us to communicate and share, is that our Africanness and the shared problems should force us to think as Africans and just put pressure and say, no. We must sort this out. Countries that have capacity and resources should actually take the lead. Why isn't South Africa manufacturing vaccines? Why isn't Egypt manufacturing vaccines?
Why isn't Zimbabwe manufacturing vaccines and Uganda and Kenya?
Exactly. Yeah. Why not? We are busy trying to run airlines, individual airlines, with one plane that is dead. But yet we think that's more important than trying to make drugs. I don't know. Our priorities need to change. But COVID has found our underlying conditions. It's going to expose it.
Absolutely. I know, people that follow this show from all over the world, Robert, love books. And this section, the book section, is one of the most popular sections of the conversation. What books, Robert, have you read? 3 books that you've read that have had an amazing impact on you that you'd want to recommend to our global audience?
Well, you gave me that task, and I must confess that I really failed. But which then brings me to the answer to your question. This morning, somebody actually put me to task and said, look, I've just had an accident and I'm sitting around doing nothing. Would you recommend a book to read? I think that, so I told her, go and buy Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Petals of Blood. I think that that is a really good fiction book to read because it takes you into how our society evolved and where the rain started beating us. I think another really little beautiful book is Mind Boy by Peter, I think it was Peter Abrahams. The simplicity of life as we knew, or as it was known then, and then what happened with all this urbanization. And I think that people need to go back to that life and reflect a lot on it. And of course, I would be unfair if I didn't recommend the old man's book, A Long Walk to Freedom. I think that no African, well, maybe there are others, I don't know, not that I know of, has been tested and come out on top and single-handedly carried this continent and represents what we can achieve, even with the level of adversity that we face, if only we just took his lessons. And that is, what do you call him? Seguru, I think is how you call it in Zimbabwe. In our part of the world, we call him Mzee Nelson Mandela. I think his story is the one story we should own. People try to appropriate it. Other people in other parts of the world use it for their lessons. I think we should.
Wow. Robert, you and I could go on having this conversation and get deep into Pan-Africanism and what it is that we need to change our continent. But I am so admiring what you're doing on the farm. Wishing you the best. Get more land, more coffee, more bananas. That hair from the banana fiber, I'm looking forward to that, and the ecotourism, exciting stuff. Robert, you represent the beautiful shoots that the continent is seeing. If we can grow our own food and stop importing food, I think that's the beginning of progress for us as a people. So we wish you all the best. Allow me, Robert, to remain where you are right now. Let me address myself to our viewers who are on the continent, in Zimbabwe, and all over the world who follow this show on a weekly basis. We are out every Monday on YouTube at 7 a.m. Central African time. And to ensure that you don't miss out on any of these quality conversations, please click on this red button here and subscribe, and you'll get an alert every time we have one of these quality conversations. We've gone a step further. We now have podcasts. Scroll down below this video and click for you to listen to the podcast. Until next time, cheers to you all.